Buenas tardes, bienvenidos a la sesión de tarde del segundo día de industria en el South International Series Festival. Os presento a Willard Tressel, Caroline Otto, Travis Donnelly. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for coming to the south, to Cádiz. We are going to talk today about it's a very long title. Writers Unions, Global Challenges for the Screenwriters Guilds in Europe and in the US. Common Challenges, Diverse Solutions. So Willard, you're the moderator today. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bienvenidos a todos, y thank you, Carlos, so much. Yes, my name is Willard Tressel. I'm your moderator today for this Writers Union. But before introducing our panelists, it kind of goes without saying that with our favorite television series and films, it all starts on the written page. And within the creative minds of writers, like illustrious people like David Shore in the audience. And without that, there's no above the line, there's no below the line. The entertainment industry absolutely depends on writers. So thank you for all that you do. Let me introduce our panelists. Travis Donnelly was just re-elected to the board of directors of the WGA West. He's been in that position since 2018, and as such has had to get involved in some of the most important issues facing writers today and the industry. Beyond the overarching issues facing writers, he highlights educating, training the writers of the future, enforcement of the WGA's hard-fought terms, and the fostering of the community of writers. Beyond all that, Travis is currently writing on a breakout hit TV series called Tracker on the CBS Broadcast Network and streaming on Paramount Plus. He's also worked on Bull and Hawaii Five-0 and many more series. So let's give a round of applause for Travis Donnelly. Caroline Otto is a German screenwriter and the current president of the the Federation of Screenwriters in Europe, FSE. During her presidency, she's emphasized the importance of screenwriters' visibility, fair remuneration, and collective bargaining, particularly in the face of challenges posed by the streamers. Caroline has been vocal on political and cultural issues affecting screenwriters, including advocating for the enforcement of the European Copyright Directive and defending freedom of expression against rising authoritarianism in Europe. And, you know, maybe we're going to need you next week in the United States. I'm not sure yet. But it goes without saying that Caroline has a long list of writing credits in the German-speaking markets. But I won't attempt to name them because I will absolutely destroy the language. Let's have a round of applause for Caroline. So Travis has come all the way from LA with his wife, Courtney, a long, long trip, and he's going right back to get back to work. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And congratulations on your re-election to the WGA board. So the WGA has negotiated with studio and streamers for terms that are largely common with the goals of FSC and the ALMA union. I should mention that we had another panelist, Carlos de Panda, who was supposed to be here. He sends his regrets, but there was a medical emergency. But the terms that you've negotiated are in common with basically FSC and ALMA. So starting with the 148-day 2023 strike, tell us about those hard-fought terms.
Yeah, well, obviously when you've been on strike for 148 days, the amount of different things we got is probably way too numerous to name, probably in a good way. When you find yourself in a situation like that, you've reached a point of having the power and the leverage to get something for everyone. So in this negotiation, we were able to get something for screenwriters, television writers, comedy variety writers, as well as all different levels. The most entry level being staff writers, and then obviously writer producers in the mid to upper levels, and then all the way to the top to showrunners like David Shore. Just to give a little context of going in, because I think it's important to sort of set the stage of it, in 2022, the streaming business lost $1.5 billion, okay? That's how many losses the streaming business took. So going into 2023, knowing we had a contract negotiating around the corner, what we were seeing is we had the knowledge of knowing that the business was going to have to recorrect. There was going to have to be some contraction, and so we already saw that coming in advance. So what we looked at from a position of strength as a union is what can we fight for to protect writers moving forward in what's inevitably going to be this new environment, right? So that was built around kind of the fundamental principles of what we can fight for is a certain number of writers working a certain number of weeks at a certain pay. And so everything kind of stemmed from there. So just to give you a couple of the things that we got that we're quite proud of, we increased minimums 14.5% across the board. Foreign residuals in what is now becoming a more global market, those residuals in streaming increased by 76%. So in an era where in streaming we were seeing very little residual return, small returns on running those shows over and over on the networks.
Because they were just getting bought out.
Yeah, it was a pittance. They were being
Yeah.
bought out across the top, and you know, writers would have be a part of a show that supposedly was viewed 10 billion minutes or whatever it is, and getting a check for $12. Now, what happened in the old broadcast model is we had those higher rates that protected writers and gave them the ability to go develop and not have to work, every single year, 24/7, or 12 months a year. We wanted to bring those rates up closer in line with what we saw in the broadcast world. And so we're able to achieve that with those increased in streaming rates. Now, an episode that airs on Netflix is worth about $75,000 for 3 years of reuse versus what used to be a few $100s, maybe less sometimes. So these were significant, substantial gains that set up writers moving forward. And then a couple of other things that, like I said, there was a lot that we did, but a couple other things I'll note that I thought were important is, Netflix, that's what we term in the business SVOD, streaming video on demand. There's another component called AVOD, which is advertising video on demand. These are things like Tubi, which is really growing, Pluto, Freevee through Amazon, Roku TV. All of these services, they're often sometimes called fast channels as well, free ad supported. There were no residual reuse protections that applied across those. It was Wild West out there. We were able to get all of the terms that we use in the streaming video on demand applied to those. So that's something I think
And that was something you took on. That was a personal mission for you.
That was definitely one of my pet projects, was to make sure that, that was one that I felt that we could be in front of the curve on. That if we didn't get it now during a strike, we wouldn't probably get it until it was something we had to really, really fight for. But I think we were in front of the curve on that. And then, as you guys have talked about in some of your other panels here, obviously the Pandora's box of AI. We were negotiating at a time when the ChatGPT had just launched. I feel like it was just a few weeks before negotiation, or right in the sweet spot of as we're trying to go into what is already a massive undertaking in the new business model and the streaming bubble preparing to burst. And then we got hit with AI as well. So I'm sure we can talk more about that in detail as we go. But I'll just say we came in with a strategy to put together what we felt were the best protections that we could get for writers going forward.
Right. Moving over to you, Carolyn. We spoke last week, and one of the first things I said to you was that clearly you're a diplomat in the job that you do. So that resonated for you. So tell us about your role and how you manage all these different markets and writers' guilds.
Yeah. In fact, we don't manage them. They are too diverse, too many, and we just try to find the common goals that the different national guilds have. And for example, one thing that really makes us, and we're very sad about it, very different from the American Guild, is that there's no obligation to become a member of a writers' guild or a directors' guild or whatever guild. So if a writer doesn't want to join its national guild, then he or she doesn't, and that takes away all the power that you have, for example. And we cannot strike, because in case of strike, somebody else will take the work, and it's very different. And then we have, of course, 27 members, and you can imagine the European Union level, how we try to come together and find our common path, which is very different in every country, and just the way that we come together reflects very much the European Union, although we have members like Great Britain and Switzerland who are not in the European Union anymore. But we try to find out, and we mostly do lobbying. We cannot do any bargaining at European level because every fee level and every contract level is different in every country. So we cannot go for how would you say, just getting one single solution for everybody, because there are countries in which people earn quite a lot, and then there are countries where people don't earn that much, and we will not try to go forward and find one sole level for everybody. That will not go with the richer countries. So all this is reflected by our job of FSE, which is completely only funded by membership fees by some partner members like the American Guild and some CMOs from Great Britain and from the French CMO and so on, and the Spanish CMO, DAMA. And our guilds as well, our members, are the ones that have to do the work at national level. We find out what they have to do, and then we say, so we will do this in Brussels, please try. If we get this legislation, you have to go into your countries and set up different questions to your national government. Sorry.
So, you've touched on lobbying, which seems to be, you have no enforcement capability, and so lobbying is very important to you. You have similar to goals to the WGA. I know that you as organizations, you do get together and try and get some agreement. So, Travis, on the lobbying side, how do you do that in the United States, and how do you go up against the big streamers and studios in terms of lobbying might?
Right. Well, as we're talking about, we have the advantage, I suppose, in the Writers Guild of America, the WGA. All of our, if you want to work for one of the signatory companies, the Disney, the Netflix, the Paramount, whatever, any of these companies, you have to be a WGA member, right? So that gives us a certain advantage that when it comes to leverage and a certain amount of solidarity when we negotiate, that gives us a leg up. Additionally to that, we do have a WGA PAC, Political Action Committee. I don't go anywhere without her. Yeah, gotta be ready.
Nice job, Courtney.
We have a political action committee through the WGA that funded by our own member contributions that specifically lobby Sacramento, which is the capital in the state of California. Some may have seen the news that Governor Newsom just announced more than doubling of the California tax credit. We're seeing production leaving California.
Yeah, it's going to be one of the richest deals in the United States.
Exactly. It'll now be, I think still a little behind Georgia, but would pass New York State. I mean, it went from $330 million a year to $750 million a year, assuming it passes. But gains like that are often achieved with the support of our PACs lobbying in Sacramento. And then we also lobby in Washington, D.C. We're very vocal about trying to push back against some of the mergers and acquisitions that we feel have hurt our business, like when Disney and Fox merged and we lost an entire studio. We currently have an administration in Washington and an FTC head in Lena Khan that's been very open and supportive to our input and listening to us in that respect. We will see if that remains in a week, but
I'll let you know. Stay tuned.
Yes, so that's where our PAC and lobbying efforts go to Washington with antitrust and those efforts, and also free and open internet that we're supportive of, net neutrality.
And I mean, that's a whole other thing. Well, I'm going to get into the AI and policies.
Yeah, I was saving that. That's kind of its own separate. We're active there too.
But just to talking about everyone getting together, the WGA strike, SAG-AFTRA, you all came together, and really the unity brought the studios to the bargaining table.
Absolutely, and I think that spoke to the moment in time that we were at, right? I don't think it was just writers or just actors or just crew members, Teamsters, IATSE, went through contract negotiations this past year, the year after us. But everyone was involved in that negotiation simply because, as I said, you look at 2022, they were losing $1.5 billion that year on streaming. We were already feeling the effects. Writer wages, just like crew wages, just like director wages and actor wages, were all being driven down to the lowest possible level. And you also have a different component that worked its way into the ecosystem, which is you had tech companies arriving. Legacy, and when we talk about legacy companies, we're talking about those old studios like Disney and Warner Brothers and Paramount that have been around forever. Well, then all of a sudden you had a whole different type of investment group funding people like Netflix and Apple and Amazon, who traditionally have been far more hostile towards unions and labor coming into the ecosystem. And sometimes you have certain norms that everyone sort of accepts as being, this is kind of the way we do business. And it doesn't have to get in writing because you all know that's how you do it. Well, when tech companies come in, they often say, well, it's not in writing, we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
So that was a big component of it. There was a lot of language issues in 2023. It was about clearing underbrush of loopholes and things. That
They
take place as
disrupt
well.
and they ask later.
Absolutely. And then to your point on working in conjunction with the FSE, we're both part of the IAWG, which is the International Affiliate of Writers Guilds. It meets every 2 years, and you can speak more to it. You just recently met in Dublin. Our officers from the WGA went there as well, and what we try to do is take our research and our analytics and share it, with the other unions in the world that are trying to achieve similar goals.
We talked a little bit about this in David Shore's presentation, but there were, in large part, you have similar goals, but one of the differences was the creation of a mini room, or the writer's room. So why don't you touch on that?
Well, and so for 60 to 70 years, the American writing system functioned in a way that was quite lucrative and beneficial for everyone, not only from a financial perspective, but also from a training and education level, where you could start as an entry-level staff writer, and as David spoke to in his earlier panel seminar, that you would work your way up with certain expectations, and you got to see how the job was being done, right? To the norms that went away when the tech companies come, they said, well, why are we keeping people around for production and post and all these different things? We can separate the writing from the production. We'll just put a few people in a room. It kind of took on this term. We called it mini rooms in America as a real problem. It's very similar, I think, more to how the system works in European writers' rooms, if there is such a thing as a room, but small group of writers go write a bunch of stuff, and then that's it, and you're done. One of the things that we weren't trying to remove this piece of the business, because they are jobs. But one of the things we got in the MBA was I guess I would best call it a redefining. We've tried to hopefully brush the term mini room into something else, which is a pre-green light development room. You can still gather that room, but there's a minimum number of weeks. And that's what we're talking about. Minimum number of writers at a minimum pay, working a minimum number of weeks. So if you're going to start planning a show, you're now committing up to 20 weeks, so many writers up to 20 weeks, right? Now, once that show becomes greenlit, the other thing that happens is if your room has only been gathered for 8 weeks, those writers, you still owe 12 more weeks. So in theory, and we're starting to see it happen, you can then have those writers go to set. So I still got 12 more weeks with Lee. Let me send you to set for your episode. Let me put you in post for a week. Or let me take 2 of my most trusted upper-level writers, and they'll be able to do the show with me the whole run. So I think we've sort of evolved from what was a pretty egregious practice that was really driving wages down.
Well, as we were talking about earlier, that's the training ground for the writers, the showrunners of the future, and it's kind of been broken. We've heard of stories of productions just shutting down, basically, and then trying to scramble and get someone in.
Well, there's no other industry in the world that doesn't put money into research and development, right?
Yeah.
No successful business, right? Yeah. And this is our version of research and development, right? And it's baked into letting people experience the parts of the job, again, ideally from cradle to grave, inception of idea on the page, then into production, and then into post.
Yeah. There's a big difference. It's more of a European audience, so you know how it's done here. Carolyn, do you want to just touch on how the writing process is done here, a writer's room versus a singular vision?
I sincerely can't tell you because it's very different in every country.
Yeah.
And I can just talk about the German experience, which is very different from others too. So I think that the writer's room experience works very in a people have very strange images of what it means. If you talk to producers in the countries, then they talk about writers' rooms, but and you think, well, this is not a writer's room, what you're describing. This is some group you put together and you don't pay, and then in the end you take it all. That's not what it's meant to be. So no, I cannot. The process is really very different.
It's just so different
Yeah.
here, yeah. Well, let's get into AI. You know, there was a panel earlier today, and there was a discussion, and basically I don't think there's any consensus whatsoever about how to deal with it, how to define it, anything. But we've seen a couple things recently. Lionsgate signed a deal with a company called Runway to basically mine or scrape all Lionsgate's, I think it's all Lionsgate's titles for image, stories, etc. You know, Lionsgate is in need of some cash, and well, they've just made some money doing this, no matter what the cost is. ITV, last week, it was announced, I think it happened the day after, or the day before we talked, Arlen. They posted a job, and I'll read it, of head of generative AI innovation to create series ideas. So, of course, right away, the UK writers just blasted the proposal of the job, and as did the Writers Guild of Great Britain. And we were talking about Ankler, the podcast series, and they're projecting that over the next 3 years, that's going to be 10x every year, the kind of money that the studios can make off of scraping their content, which, you know, in these distressed studio times, maybe that's attractive to them. So we just don't know what it is exactly. So what kind of protections did the WGA negotiate? And I know it was at its infancy, but now we know a little bit more, which also means that when you go back in a couple of years for a renegotiation, you're going to know a lot more too. So,
Right. Yeah. I mean, you know, we're obviously seeing. Look, I mean, the ideas of AI taking away jobs is not exclusive to the entertainment or the content creation business, right? We're talking about something on par with the Industrial Revolution, which 50 years ago, you know, made a huge impact on blue-collar jobs. We're now seeing in this new technological revolution that's probably going to have a real impact on what we might call white-collar jobs, right? And so there's some historical preference or precedence having seen how this process works, and it will impact all of us. The approach that we took as a negotiating committee was not to try to ban or stop AI, you know, stopping technology. You know, you don't want to stop the production of automobiles because you're in the horse and buggy business. You know, what we were trying to do, though, was put in some reasonable common sense protections that, at least from our perspective at the time, protects what a writer actually is. And this may sound silly, but one of the first points of contention is we wanted to define with the studios we were negotiating with that a writer is a human being. At the moment that we went on strike, they would not discuss this. They would not negotiate on this, right? It was only after we went on strike, and in retrospect, they acknowledged they should have approached this issue with us earlier, but they didn't. And by the time we got through it, what we wanted to do, in a nutshell, was to define that a writer is a human being, right?
That's a good start.
Yeah, exactly, right? And that the writer who does work for these companies is a WGA member. These are protections that we can take care of, right? So essentially what we're saying to some degree is we don't know, no one knows exactly what this is going to morph into or turn into, but whatever that is, it will be WGA members doing that process. And again, you go back to the minimum number of writers, minimum number of weeks, minimum amount of pay, right? That's what we can fight for, and that's what we got in that they agreed that they cannot give us AI-generated material and ask us to rewrite it. So that you can't basically, you know, reduce the fees that a WGA member would make writing a script, and we have to be informed anytime AI is being used. You know, so look, the honest truth is we've opened Pandora's box. It's just nobody knows what's inside yet, you know? And that's what we're all sort of navigating the waters through together. Our biggest concern, and we share it with our sister unions overseas, is how our work is used in training these new AI models. And what becomes a little bit unique about this is, in fact, the studios that we were negotiating with, to some degree, we have similar interests in this. The Walt Disney Company doesn't want their property used to train AI any more than a writer does. And in this way, it's really companies, third-party companies, maybe like an OpenAI, potentially Microsoft, Google, these other tech companies who may be using their work just as much as ours. So to some degree, I think there is that's why we have established a very consistent stream of communication when you reference the Lionsgate deal. These are things that we're having constant discussions with. I mean, with AI, is it, we heard these stories about crypto, right? And that didn't prove to be true. Is it crypto or is it Skynet? I guess we'll find out, but we're all sort of walking through it together. And at least in this capacity, we're keeping a very open line of communication with the studios who have some vested interests as well, and then trying to share all that analytics and research to hopefully help the other European writers' unions as they move forward into the same territory.
Yeah. Carolina, you want to add anything to your thoughts about AI in Europe and how you're preparing for that?
Well, let's say there's one big difference in European law is that most of the countries on the European continent have droit d'auteur, not copyright law, which means it's a little bit different in the use of rights afterwards and in the remuneration. And the copyright, the AI industry says that the training of the AI is covered by European law that says, it's Article 4, I think, on text and data mining for scientific use is allowed. But, of course, 10 years ago it was not meant to be, because it was just really for scientific use and for small things. And so there was a study that a German initiative brought up and presented at the European Parliament, and now they have to redo it because it's not, of course, it is copyright infringement if you train an AI, because of course they used all the books, everything they could get and put it into it, and they didn't ask anybody if they could use it. So this is copyright infringement, and now let's see what happens, because what happened on this panel this morning was exactly the way I feel what everybody's into now, because you don't know exactly what's going to happen, and you somehow manage while it's happening somehow, but not with a real plan. So yeah, let's try to find a way, because I think that many mediocre industry work can be done in the industry as well by AI. And then you put another writer on it and you just humanize it a little bit and you put some individual touches on it. But the writer gets paid less, of course, because somebody already owns this first draft, which is just a mechanical draft that maybe a producer fed with certain things and says, here's my first draft. I just need somebody to really put life into it. So this is what the union, what at least we are talking about, is that writers will get paid less if this is coming in. And at that status, at something which is just okay, which is broadcasted, which is sent, and things like that nowadays are as well a field where writers experience themselves, where they try to make experiences in writing and where they grow. And then if this first step is taken away by some mechanical industry, then how can writers learn? I mean, it's not everything is top of the pops, David Shore or something. It can be there's daily industry to feed.
And that was one of the
giving
protections.
the money, yeah.
And that was one of the protections we were able to get in our contract that, we hope that can be emulated in other countries. Is again, a producer can't come to a WGA member and say, here's the first draft, now I'll just pay you for a rewrite. You know, and that's why, as silly as it may sound, that's why it was important to identify and define a writer as a human being, so that, you know,
We would
that
love
first
your
step.
contracts. We would love your contracts, but I think people are not honest in the way they use things. They come up with something, and for example, I was in a film commission to find out, to give fundings to writers, and then I said, this is not written by a human being. This is something really, it has so very general expressions, so very, and then you think, this was written by AI. So I said, I don't care if it's written by AI or not, this is bad anyway, but you can see a certain touch. Well, it will become better, I'm sure, but it will take away the daily work for many writers.
Well, we need some transparency and honesty.
Yeah.
Someone brought up in a previous panel that it really depends on honesty from the writer, what tools they're using or how they're generating ideas. And maybe that applies to the studios. We talked about, you know, Disney, they have a vested interest to protect their IP, but like Matt Bellany on The Town, he mentioned a couple weeks ago, well, I've heard that Disney has their own AI team developing ideas, and then, you know, you hear about this UK, the ITV deal. So, I mean, honesty is, how do you enforce that? How do you get people to
Right.
be honest?
I mean, one of the, you know, yes, obviously transparency becomes an integral part in understanding where the problems are moving ahead. The side of the coin that we haven't talked about, though, that at least at this stage, I think, while it doesn't necessarily put up guardrails, but at least maybe slows the process just a little bit, is there's a legitimate legal case to be made that this is plagiarism by these machines, right? And we're seeing it done. Groups of authors have already filed lawsuits. So there is a legal component that still is yet to work its way through the system, and that may help provide some transparency additionally as well. We'll see.
Yeah, oversight. And getting back also to regulation, you know, in the United States, the internet's been around since the 1990s, but our political leaders have yet to be able to get their heads around how to put some guardrails on the internet. Now we're talking about AI, and we're talking about, we have you know, members of the House and Senate who are like in their 80s or 90s. It's I mean, how are they going to get their heads around this?
Yeah,
I'm just-
I was going to say,
maybe it's more of
yeah.
a statement than a question.
I think
but-
we'll all be watching and waiting to see.
Yeah.
But I mean, the best we can do is try to negotiate the best parameters that we can through our contracts, and then use the strength and leverage of our PACs, you know, our political action committee, to lobby in that direction, and you know, and
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
mean, the thing is that we want to talk about the future of AI, but right now there are these models, and they are already fed with quite a lot of things that exist. So this is copyright infringement. Now, how can we heal this? And the only way it is that you say, okay, you make some payment, and we just, at least in European Union, it's like this. I think that the CMOs will somehow spread the money the governments get from the tech firms that used AI and made copyright infringement. And this is some kind of, I don't know the English word, just some that's set up theoretically. It's not what it's really worth. I say, okay, we pay like so and so many $1 million, and then you spread it, and then it's done. And then your thing is gone. It's forever. It's paid, although you didn't want it, although it's not worth, the money is not enough. But this is the past. The past is the problem right now, and the future is what we might be able to handle a little bit better. But these models only exist because they already used all the works that they can get.
Yeah, one thing on copyright, we talked earlier
Yeah.
that, you know, the writers are not protected as much in Europe, but they do get rights to their property. Tell us how it's dealt with in the United States.
Yeah, well, writers in the Writers Guild, we do not maintain copyright. That was something that was traded, I think, 1960, I think, was traded in exchange for residuals, pension, and health. So the residuals and pension and health have sort of become the lifeblood of the writer's career, and I think you could argue is what, in many cases, can allow American writers to, maybe have a little more viable careers, and like we were talking about, be able to profit from, their work in perpetuity, even though they don't maintain legal copyright.
Yeah. And pension health in the United States is super important because unlike
Right.
Europe, we don't have socialized medicine. We largely don't even have pensions anymore from
Right.
most companies. So it's very important. So you're working on Tracker.
Yeah.
And again, it's been a big hit, both on the linear side and on the streaming side. Unlike many shows, I mean, first of all, it's broadcast, so congratulations
Right.
being in the broadcast world, because so many writers, we've talked about before, I think you mentioned it, they all went over the streaming when it was just the thing. And
I stayed. I willingly stayed.
God, you're so smart.
Yeah.
You're so smart. And they got 22 episodes, which is unheard of these days. It really is.
Well, hopefully an indication of where the trend line may be going into the future. I guess we'll see. I think we see these things move in a cyclical pattern. I think in the streaming area, there was a different sort of mandate. I think, again, as we talked about, with no real I guess, demand for profitability. They were
how about
able,
that?
their stock price continued to go up even as they were losing money. And so then that was a system of chasing prestige and Emmys and that seemed to, at least at that time, kind of correlate to some degree with more niche, smaller audiences was fine. Well, then at a certain point, Wall Street started to say, hey, you guys should probably make money, right? And that sort of flipped the model on its head. And then you start to see, one of the ways that you can be cost conscious is to amortize your costs over more episodes. Again, something we
Hey,
were
how
doing
about
for
that?
60 or 70 years. So when you make 20 episodes, you can sometimes, you can start making the cost cheaper. I also think we've learned some lessons. I think there was a thought that, young people that live in a TikTok and screen in their hand world, only have the attention span for 6 episodes or 2 minutes at a time and all this kind of thing. But then what did we see? We saw a whole generation, watch 120 episodes of Suits. Do you know what I mean? Which couldn't be more of a procedural sort of old school show as they come. So I think some of these things, for a writer's career, one of the things that we really don't have control over, but it is an important component, is just the trends of the market, right? And I think we saw the trends going towards the shorter episodes, shorter orders, more prestige, message-driven shows. And now I think we're seeing the trend move back to a little more of long-form orders, maybe broader appeal, things like that as they try and find ways to navigate. And then probably the sweet spot is for doing some of both, right? I mean, isn't that always the sweet spot, right? Shouldn't be one or the other. There's enough demand from viewers for, short order prestige shows, and also what we call nowadays prestigirals, or where we do 20 episodes,
Yeah.
So I'm optimistic that trend will continue. We're seeing shows get ordered for HBO Max that are 15 episodes long. Amazon's ordering 13-episode series orders now. So fingers crossed that continues, because that's better for writers, more stability.
Yeah, and I guess that plays into your sort of hope that AVOD, which is sort of going back in time to an advertiser-supported television stream, will create the metrics that you need for your constituency to get compensated.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Again,
What's old is new?
What's old is new. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you touched a little bit about industry contraction. There's some who will blame the strike, blame the terms, that whole thing. But that boat had sailed. It was.
Yeah, the numbers don't lie, right? They
Yeah.
lost $1.5 billion a year before we went on strike. That model had already failed
Right.
long before we stepped into a negotiating room. So those articles are ill-informed at best.
Yeah, I mean, again, in the United States, Wall Street sort of, I'm taking a little bit of a political view, I guess, but sort of fueled the streaming, the bubble. And everyone just, like lemmings, just went after it, and no matter if it made money or not, they went for it. And they broke, you talked about it a little bit earlier, they broke the model. They broke the model that made money. Theatrical and the pandemic didn't help, but the theatrical window's gone, the pay TV, premium pay 1, pay 2, syndication, it just all collapsed. And so now they're trying to figure out.
Well, and you can kind of understand where it comes from in the infancy of it, right? When you had the streaming where everyone's chasing against each other, and what makes your service look the best, I suppose, is the most little buttons to hit, right? So 6 episodes makes sense because every 6 episodes you get a new little button to put on your screen, right? And it looks like you have lots of stuff. That was driving the initial subscriptions, which at the time was all Wall Street was asking of them. Now you start talking about a model where it's like, okay, can you make money? Well, making money means your customer's not leaving, right? So are you more likely to stick around and watch a 6-episode series that you can binge watch over a weekend, or stick around for a 20-episode series that airs weekly over 4 months? Well,
Yeah.
these are different models, and one probably, I think we've moved out of that phase of we just need lots of buttons to now we need people to stay. Now we want people to be invested in our shows and say, I'm not going to cancel because there's going to be the next Tracker spinoff or the next David Shore show will be showing up again in a month, so it'll be back. You know what I mean? Like that's what makes customers stay.
Yeah, and I think, maybe we see, again, going back to weekly rollouts of shows, which, again, builds an audience, builds buzz, builds social media, and a following ultimately. And, they can binge at some point, but, you want the buzz. And
Yeah.
we talked about shows that people have talked about, and then you go, well, I didn't even hear about that.
Right,
It had this big
right.
star,
Yes, exactly.
So MIPCOM just happened, the big market, and some of the things that are being reported from there, they're going to be more procedurals at a lower cost. Some say, one of the quotes I saw was keeping the lights on and mitigate risk. Everyone's trying to mitigate risk. Are they using analytics to sort of drive the ideas, or are they delving into AI to say what's the safest, whatever it is? So it's a little bit frustrating for writers these days. Sometimes they don't know who to call at a network or at a buyer because there's so much consolidation and people leaving. They just don't know where to go.
The target keeps moving, right, at any given moment.
And then if the person's gone, well, what does the network want or the buyer want?
Yeah, and I mean, and again, things like that, admittedly, fall in that category. Or there's not a lot a labor union can do to, slow executive churn or tighten the focus of what their interests in wanting to hear pitches and development is, right? But I do think I tend to believe that again these things move cyclically, and I think we're still seeing the end of the dust settling, right? And some of this changeover as everyone tries to figure out what their new models are, I think in time does settle and will become more clear. And then in the meantime, what we have done is protect that when a writer's working, they're making the most money possible and are working the highest guaranteed number of weeks that we can negotiate. That's what a union can do.
From your lips to the studio gods.
Exactly. Fingers crossed. I'm an optimist.
Yeah, good. We should take some questions. And just on the health of the business, we were talking a little bit earlier about the corporate health. And Netflix alone has $14 billion in debt right now, which is dwarfed by Warner Brothers Discovery, which has like about $45 billion in debt. So the business is trying to find its way for sure.
And we have seen these things consistently happen throughout the business, right? If you look back to the history of motion pictures, it's very much the same way, right? Big studio releases in the 50s, everyone got antsy about that. Then you see this creative movement in the late 60s, early 70s. Most people look back at the 80s as being pretty bland and broad, which is what they're talking about now. But that's where a lot of the current IP we're doing is coming from now, right? Was the so-called bland and downtime. And then the 90s, you had sort of the independent film explosion. So I do think these things move in cycles. And
Yeah, let's see. what the next Cinerama is going to be.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions? Yeah. Do you have a mic?
Hi, hello. You speak a lot about protection of the writers towards, the studios and their usage, potential usage of AI. Do you see also in your members people on their own using AI tools in their writing process and being positively using this, thinking it's a nice tool?
Well, I mean, and as I spoke to when we went into the negotiation, the position of the Writers Guild has not been to ban the use of AI. I mean, it's a personal choice to some degree from writers. I mean, I've heard some stories anecdotally, but I mean, it's like you largely. On one end, you have some people who believe it's the poisonous fruit and won't touch it, and then you have other people who believe it's helpful to use every day. Most of the people I talk to who say that they're using it a lot, honestly, what they describe is a more efficient Google. It's like Google on steroids. You know what I mean? I've yet to hear someone say, "Wow, I wrote a really great scene, and then I gave it to AI, and it made my scene better." Like I've yet to hear that story. But when you're talking about I've heard some people talk about log lines and ideas that it feels like, it helps kind of spur on some, creative thoughts for myself. If you're saying, hey, I'm looking for 25 ways to find a murdered body in a dumpster that is based on real life, well, the Chat GPT it's basically speeding up the Google process, right? A writer would do that more slowly through Google, so maybe you get a list and maybe it prompts something. And so those are writers that seem to be using it as a tool, and I think that becomes a personal choice. From our perspective as a union, what we're doing is protecting that AI is not taking away writers' jobs and not lessening their pay in any capacity. Those are the two things that matter the most. And then as we move forward, as I said, Pandora's box is open. We just don't know what's inside, so we continue to talk, we continue to monitor, and it's obviously front and center as we look forward to the next negotiations and then potential litigious action that may happen from other outside sources. So it's very much something we have to monitor, but at this moment, what we do is protect the writers, and protect their wages.
And Caroline, in Europe, same perspective?
I think that writers already use it, and that some of them like to use it. But I think it's not clear what will happen afterwards with it, because it's so. Who has the droit d'auteur afterwards? Who can sell it? Who can get the use out of it? And so these are all the questions that are not clear. But let's put it clear: the writers don't have any clue about their rights, or the rights they are hurting, or the rights they might not get if they continue to go on. So this is really not very well in their minds, I think.
As things are becoming more global, as their streaming services and services in general are there's Korean television shows that anybody can see, shows within Europe. Are the countries, have you seen an evolution in Europe of countries becoming, getting together and having this discussion and things changing within the writers, within the different countries?
I think that writers are coming together to talk if they have an interest in this, if there are platforms like, I think in Series Mania, and then writers are meeting and they get into touch with each other. But let's say this is for many of them, it's the joy of creating together or to do something. But it's not the idea that this creation has a value and has a future life. So this is. I think that in Europe there are already many co-productions. There are many countries working together, and even the writers are coming from different countries. So this already happens, and there's this this Netflix note that you have, like the idea how a Netflix show should be. That has come into the mind of all the writers. I like
And
the
how does the writers-
algorithm that is.
And how does the Writers Guild work? I mean, I don't understand much at all. Honestly, I'm an actor, but how does it work if you have writers from the United States and writers from Europe working on the same project? How does how does
Well, the only way
rights
that would work is if the writers from Europe were working under a WGA signatory contract, and that's what I was talking about. Is this the advantage that we have in the way our system's set up, and the Writers Guild of America, the companies are signatories to our contracts. So if Disney wants to hire any writers, they have to be WGA writers or European writers who then
Affiliated,
become
yeah.
WGA members as part of that writers crew. If you wanted to have a separate, just a group of European writers, that couldn't be done by Disney or Paramount or someone who's signatory to our contract here in the U.S. It would be a separate thing. So by the same token, a WGA writer, you couldn't, not just one WGA writer could bounce into a European writer's room
I
in the
think
same
there's-
capacity.
You know, that doesn't happen because of this contract landscape. It's very different. And even if you get it, it depends on the country where the production is mainly placed, and there's some difficulties between the production companies as well, and on how to pay the writers. Because if you, for example, the 45-minute fee in Germany is different than the 45-minute fee in Italy or in Spain or in Poland. So it depends very much on the local level, and then would you pay less or more? So this is just always the question. It depends on the production company and in the end.
Yeah,
the
I spoke to
broadcaster.
both an agent in LA and a streamer executive. And so the agent, everything's driven by for the streamer as far as a local cost, and it has to make sense for that local thing. But the agent says, well, yeah, but it's going to go over the world. So if it's going to go over the world, I want to know what markets it's in, and I want to get compensated based on that. But the streamers are fighting back on that. But then the streamers will say, yeah, but we're building in better residuals for writers these days. So they're going to get compensated based on global use. They're not going to they don't want to do that upfront payment, which reflects the global footprint of the show. But so there's a bit of a battle going on there.
And one of the most important things was the Netflix bargaining all worldwide, or let's say European-wide, because Netflix cannot talk about your contracts. They are very secretive about it. So they are. But anyway, the guilds that were in bargaining with Netflix exchange informations at a personal level. But then you see very well that Netflix is knowing the country where it's going to, and it just offers what is offered anyway there. It doesn't go to American levels. It doesn't go to some abstract European level. If they do a Netflix film or show in Poland, they will pay Polish fee levels.
Right.
Although it's exploited in the whole world immediately.
So Travis, Netflix has been known to not share anything, but they've had to be somewhat transparent with. They have to be transparent with you. Are you satisfied with that?
Well, I mean, we're talking a lot about transparency, and I mean, our perspective as a union is you can kind of never have enough transparency, right? Within amongst your own members, as well as with the companies that you negotiate with. I think, again, going back to the market trends, we'll probably need a little help, but the idea that everyone's starting to establish ad tiers is probably helpful from a transparency perspective.
Yeah.
Now also because one of the things we got in this negotiation was the first time a viewing bonus on streamers. It's just kind of the first foundational piece of what could grow into something bigger over time. But we got that first piece, and that does require them letting us know at least. To some degree, which shows are in the highest viewed. Netflix is then kind of jumped in front of it and tried to use that as a bit of a bragging right, it
Yeah.
seems like, amongst the other streamers. So, we shall see. But everyone adding an ad tier probably starts to get us closer to transparency on its own. And I think, again, we're getting out of that stage where they could benefit from not letting anyone know how many customers they had because they were losing money, but Wall Street didn't care.
Right.
Now we're out of that system a little bit, and I think that I think, but sure, I mean, we're never satisfied with the amount of transparency you're getting from your employers, but but hopefully we keep on. We're on a better trajectory than we were a few years ago, I would say.
Oh, good. Well, I think we're out of time, and so I want to thank you both for being here, and thanks
Thanks for having
Carlos
us.
for putting this together, and thank you all for your participation.
Nice meeting you. That was fun.